So I don't know when you guys are listening, but we're recording this Monday morning, January 17th, and it's an important date for a couple of reasons. One is Martin Luther King Day. It's a holiday in the US, and I've always treated it as a holiday, even though I've spent much of my life in Canada. Even in Canada, like unless I'm recording this show, don't look for me at work on Martin Luther King Day. And also it is Muhammad Ali's birthday. If he were alive, he would be 80 years old today. So we're gonna finish with some Martin Luther King talk, but let's start with Muhammad Ali, because I can't, Dave, you tell me, because I can't think of two people in American history more frequently misquoted and quoted further out of context than these two.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, in some people's hands, Martin Luther King said one quote and one quote only. And it was that we need to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And that's, of course, used by people who want nothing more than to judge people by the color of their skin by denying them basic and fundamental rights. So that's one way in which they're utterly misquoted. And the other way is Muhammad Ali. Go look up online Muhammad Ali famous quotes. And geez. Most of them are of the self-help variety.
Yes.
Like find a man who hasn't learned more by the time he's 50 than he's 20, and they've wasted 30 years of their life. I mean, the sort of thing that you imagine like some, elderly sitcom dad with a pipe and slippers. And I don't even know how reputable it is that Muhammad Ali even said these things, but
I think most of those are I think most of them are apocryphal. Like the one about I hated every moment of training. Like this was a guy that used to, there was a school bus that went to school, and he would say, I don't need the school bus. I'm going to run to school.
Yeah.
I think he trained pretty voraciously as a younger man. So while I'm with you, Dave, real quick, Ali, because there's a glut of Ali content out there always. Give the people something to get them through snow day.
Absolutely. Check out, it's a very easy and fun read. It's called Redemption Song, Muhammad Ali in the Spirit of the 1960s. I love this book by Mike Marquesi because so many books about Ali, if you think about it, they center him from the perspective of an outraged United States. And how horrified people are by his joining the Nation of Islam and his words about the war in Vietnam and how outraged mainstream America is. Redemption Song contextualizes Muhammad Ali in the context of a global African liberationist framework, which was also happening in the 1960s, and how he was perceived by that political awakening. So I find it to be much more edifying than the typical Ali book, which tends to recycle the same stories we've heard over and over again. So Redemption Song, Muhammad Ali in the Spirit of the 60s by Mike Marquesi.
Perfect. Megan McPeak, do you have a preferred Ali book, film, or fight?
Fight, no, because I'm too young to have seen him fight in his prime.
Like me and Dave.
But I think it kind of ties into what Dave just said with just getting a little bit more context into who he was. And I know we had talked about it when it first came out, but The One Night in Miami, I think was a really good movie. And it wasn't a documentary. It was just the thoughts of what happened that night. But I think it kind of goes into what Dave is saying in the fact that there's way more context to who he was as more than just a fighter. And then I also think that Will Smith's portrayal of him and Ali was fantastic and was a really great movie as well.
The best actor in that film was James Lights Out Tony, who played Joe Frazier. Remember this? And James, I think he was still an active fighter at that point, but he did a really good job. Dave, you're going to say something.
I thought you were going to say James Lights Out Fox. Jamie Foxx is Bundini Brown.
As Bundini Brown, yes. Yes,
I thought he stole the show in Ali. But yeah, just shout out to my high school daughter's AFAM, that's African American history teacher, who had them watch One Night in Miami and write an essay where they talked about the liberation perspectives of all four men who were in the hotel room. And it was a great assignment. She got a ton out of it. Shout out to Regina King for creating not just great culture and film, but something that actually has the power to educate a new generation.
Yeah, and shout out to your high school for having an AFAM history class, to your daughter's high school for having an AFAM history class, because we know curriculum like that is under threat, like all across the country. We're going to get to that at the end of the show. As for me, well, Dave, here's some Ali content that you and I will agree not to recommend to anybody. And so if you're out here Googling this stuff, just skip straight past this story. And it was a column that came out in Sports Illustrated in 2017 that asked the question, what would have become of Muhammad Ali if he had never met Malcolm X? And in this fantasy retelling of the story, if Ali never meets Malcolm X, he fights his fights, retires rich and healthy, and lives to 100. Which is to say that Malcolm X gave Muhammad Ali brain damage. Just skip that one. Skip it.
And Malcolm X somehow out of whole cloth created a whole series of life experiences for young Cassius Clay that drove him towards trying to find political answers.
Right.
It's, I mean, for anybody who cares about history, I found that column to be like the biggest piece of steaming crap that I'd ever seen in the history of the Sports Illustrated website. And this is a magazine that once gave us the Bouffant Bunny track theme.
Yeah, the Where's Daddy cover. Remember Where's Daddy?
The Where's Daddy cover.
Basketball. Yep.
The Your Money or Your Shoes cover. I mean,
I forgot about that one.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
So even in that context of a historic, amazing magazine that's given us some of the great writers of the last 100 years, I would argue, you have in place some real steaming loads, and Malcolm X gave Ali brain damage. Put that at the top of the list.
Yeah, so skip that one unless you want to laugh. But otherwise, here's what I recommend. Really quick recommendations. If you're reading books, there's a lot of Ali books out there. And if you're into the boxing aspect of it, well, two that I would recommend. One is called Ghosts of Manila by Mark Cram Sr., and it's all about the blood feud between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. The second one is Blood Brothers, which is also a documentary on Netflix by Johnny Smith and Randy Roberts. It's all about the relationship between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. So you learn a lot about Ali in these books, and like one of the threads that runs between the two books is like you will see Ali looking like a jerk in a lot of ways. But like, this is sort of what we need, not people to kneecap Ali, but just to present him as a full and complete human being who could be really petty in a lot of ways, who really did like overdo everything he did and said to Joe Frazier because we were past the point of selling fights. Like, this became personal, and what Muhammad Ali really displayed in his race baiting is another word for it of Joe Frazier is like this really deep-seated colorism, because he was, in a lot of ways, he was a man of his era and a man of his generation. But what it does is it helps you understand him as a human being and not as a symbol and not as this mascot that people have made him into. So it doesn't diminish what he does or who he was or what he accomplished, but it just lets you understand him, help understand him as a human being, as opposed to a mannequin or a two-dimensional drawing. And the Muhammad Ali fight I would recommend is Ali versus Cleveland Williams, which was, I think, 1966 in the Astrodome. And here's why I recommend that fight, is because a lot of what we remember about Muhammad Ali fight-wise comes from like the second half of his career. We like to talk about the Thriller in Manila. That was him against George Foreman in Zaire. We like to talk, against Joe Frazier in the Philippines. We like to talk about the Rumble in the Jungle, but that was also like older, slower, fatter Ali. And like, you could see his heart on display and his toughness and all of that. And that's great. But like, for me, and I think what gets lost about Ali is what he was at his best. And what I like seeing is the best at their best. What are they able to produce? How can they perform when they're at their best and they're not compromised by age and by a thickening waistline and slowing down feet and diminished reflexes? And so Muhammad Ali's Cleveland Williams fight, that is like the Usain Bolt running 9:58. That's like Usain Bolt running 19:19. That's the best at his best. And like, the world has never seen a heavyweight boxer with the combination of size and speed and skill and reflexes and savvy, the equal of what Muhammad Ali did that night in Houston. So if you guys get a chance to look at Ali, Cleveland Williams in Houston at the Astrodome, do it, because that is peak. Because we didn't get to see Ali at what would have been his peak, because he was suspended, but this is the closest thing to it. Long intro, guys. I know, I'm sorry, but this is a special day. Welcome back to Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I'm your host, Morgan Campbell. We do this every week with Dave Zirin, who is the sports editor of The Nation and author of 11 books, most recently The Kaepernick Effect. He's in Washington, D.C. Also in Washington, D.C. is Megan McPeak, play-by-play voice of the Capital City Go-Go, play-by-play voice of the Washington Mystics, sometime play-by-play voice of the Washington Wizards, and also a proud representative of Humber College and Hamilton, Ontario. We got a lot to get to this week. We talk some more boxing later on. We talk COVID-19 because that's still going on. So we're going to talk Djokovic and Alphonso Davies. But let's start here, Dave. I don't know how you guys felt in Megan. 2007, the Super Bowl that year, that January. Or it might have been in February by then. The Colts and the Bears. And this is the first time you had two black head coaches in the Super Bowl playing each other. Tony Dungy with the Colts, Lovie Smith with the Bears. And I remember like leading up to that game, because like I'm a Bears fan, almost despite of what the Bears do to me every year, not because of it. Like I don't watch the Bears anymore because I'm a Bears fan, if that makes sense. But I remember feeling so proud and hopeful and optimistic when watching that game. Because even though I was a Bears fan, and even though the Bears lost, like another part of me didn't lose because we had two black head coaches. And I felt like this era of the black head coach is an anomaly, and the black head coach is the last hired, first fired, was finally going to subside. That here we are, Dave, on Martin Luther King Day 2022, a grand total of one black head coach in the NFL. What is even happening?
Well, what's happening, I thought, was described well by Mike Silver. And if people don't know who Mike Silver is, he's not only a reporter for NFL.com, he's a longtime NFL guy who has wrote over 70 cover stories for Sports Illustrated, most of them about the National Football League. So he's somebody who not only knows the league, he's somebody who has made a terrific living because of the National Football League. And even with all of that, and with his embedded status as a made guy in NFL media, he released a tweet after, I believe it was the firing of Brian Flores from Miami, but it may have been after the firing of David Culley with the Houston Texans that put us down to one black head coach in the entire National Football League, that being Mike Tomlin, of course, with the Steelers. And Mike Silver said, there is systemic racism in the National Football League, and he didn't stop there. He said, and there are real racists in positions of power. So what do you do? Because that was your question. What do you do when you have real racists in positions of power in a league that is systemically racist? How do you possibly punch through that particular glass ceiling? I mean, it's not even glass. It's like, it's that substance from the Marvel movies. What is that? Adamantium,
vibranium,
whatever that's called.
the vibranium. Oh, adamantium.
Oh, the vibranium we're going with. Oh, yeah.
Adamantium.
I was going with whatever
claws.
Wolverine was made out of.
Yeah, adamantium. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I'm not a big comics person in that regard, but the point
I only
is,
know those two.
when you have systemic racism and when you have real racists in position of power, you need a plan with teeth. So the first thing, how do you change this? First, you need a commissioner who's willing to actually stand up to ownership. You don't have that in Roger Goodell, and as long as you don't have that, I don't see change coming. So let's pretend you get a new commissioner in with a spine. This is my 3-point plan, because I've been thinking about this all weekend. First and foremost, you've got the Rooney Rule, which just compels ownership. It's so embarrassing that they've even had the Rooney Rule, because all it is saying, hey, you white country club billionaire guy who owns a team, you actually have to sit down with a person of color. You actually have to sit down with women candidates, because we know that you wouldn't unless we didn't have a rule that compelled you to do it. So the existence of the Rooney Rule is, to me, a terrible condemnation about that systemic racism and about the fact that you have racists in position of power. So you don't get rid of it. A lot of people are like, get rid of the Rooney Rule, it doesn't work. My argument is give the Rooney Rule some teeth. If a franchise owner violates the Rooney Rule, Jerry Jones, don't give them some fine that they could find in the cushions of their couch. Take away a first-round draft pick. See how long it lasts then. Take away a first-round draft pick for violating the Rooney Rule. Second, create set-asides for coordinator positions where you have people of color in assistant and coordinator positions on the sidelines, so you even further increase the hiring pool. Now, anybody out there who says, well, wait a minute, what about merit? Isn't that like a set-aside or a quota? I would answer, look how many children of coaches are on the sideline in the National Football League. I mean, my goodness. I mean, they're 20 something years old and they're armed only with peach fuzz and an attitude, and they treat their job as if it's a family heirloom handed to them instead of something that they earned. I mean, so as long as you have this incredible culture of set-asides and free and easy jobs for the children of coaches, have set-asides for people of color in coordinator positions. And then the last thing, and then I'll stop talking because I know I've been filibustering here, but this is something that it's been exploding in my brain all weekend, is when this racism takes place, and it takes place like a metronome every single year when you've got the hiring process and this window of embarrassing hiring takes place, stop asking Mike Tomlin and Tony Dungy for comment. We need a culture that goes straight, not just to franchise owners, but to white coaches. But to white coaches. I mean, you're supposed to be part of this fraternity where we're all, blah, blah, blah. It's like, go to them and say, how does it feel to live in the equivalent of a restricted country club when it comes to your job? So let's turn up the heat on the people who should be answering the questions. I think if we do those three things, we at the very least have a better chance at progress than we currently have.
Yeah, we need to disabuse ourselves, not us, but, the royal we. Disabuse ourselves of the idea that merit and diversity, merit and multiculturalism are in opposition, because they actually work together. Because if I've restricted my talent pool to white guys who have coached with Sean McVay, if I restrict my talent pool to white guys who are the sons of NFL coaches, I have a very shallow talent pool, not to mention the fact that, and this happens in baseball too, like the factors that used to qualify you for head coaching jobs, all of a sudden now don't. We've seen white person after white person go from brilliant offensive coordinator to head coach. That is the usual path. Sometimes defensive coordinator to head coach, quarterbacks coach to head coach. So this would suggest that Eric Bieniemy should have had a head coaching job. Byron Leftwich, right? Here's the guy going tete-a-tete with Tom Brady every day, figuring out how to carve up defenses with a 45-year-old man who can't really throw the ball downfield anymore, but they find ways to do it. And Byron Leftwich is helping get the best out of this 44-year-old quarterback. Is his phone ringing for these jobs? I'm not sure it is. Meanwhile, these guys go through the traditional, climb the ladder traditionally, but all of a sudden, we want something different. We want Urban Meyer. We want Cliff Kingsbury. And this is nothing, it's nothing against Kingsbury. It is something against Urban Meyer. But what a lot of these Black coaches who otherwise would be qualified are finding that, the playing field is always shifting and tilting. And this is one of the ways that coaching stays so white. Megan McPeak, do you have any ideas on why this stays so white and how to change it?
I think Dave laid it out pretty clearly. And the only thing I would add is just like incoherent nepotism, whether it's your friend of a friend. Like I saw a tweet after the KC and Cowboys games last night, and it was the two coordinators pitted head to head against each other. And it was Kellen Moore, hasn't had any wins in the playoffs. Eric Bieniemy is 6-0 in the playoffs, and Kellen Moore will most likely get head coaching interest. Like that was the tweet. And I think that lays it out perfectly. Like this kid has never won in the playoffs and will probably get interviews. And as you just mentioned, he has had such a success as a coordinator and barely gets an interview. Like I think that lays it out perfectly.
And speaking of privilege, guess who's on their way back home from Australia? Novak Djokovic, because COVID-19 is still a thing in the sports world. Guys, girls, it's still a thing. So last time we discussed Novak Djokovic, he thought he found his way into Australia to play in the Australian Open, even though he's not vaccinated, and everybody coming into that Australia has to be vaccinated. So now lost his final court battle. He's on his way back home to, I guess, train for the French Open. And
is he?
He was, well, yeah, that's true. But he was very respectful of the process on the way out, right? Not a lot of grandstanding, not a lot of I'm smarter than you posturing, because he's not trying to get that 3-year ban from Australia. He wants to come back next year and try to win another title. Here's my favorite, because New York Times has a column on it. Here's my favorite passage from that column, because again, Novak Djokovic says, I can't take a vaccine. That's not natural. I'm into natural healing. So he had this elbow problem. And the story says he had a commitment. This is from Christopher Clary, the New York Times. He had a commitment to natural healing that foreshadowed his decision not to be vaccinated for the coronavirus. But after playing and struggling at the Australian Open in 2018, with his elbow supported by a compression sleeve, natural compression. You guys don't have natural compression sleeves that just spring from your body. He decided tearfully, he has said, to undergo surgery. But what happens before you get surgery, Dave?
You got.
What do they give you to make you go to sleep before, so it doesn't hurt?
You got to take a little of that anesthesia,
right? So, like, I guess here's where we'll start the discussion. Like, how much of our time and energy has Novak Djokovic wasted?
All of it.
Novak Djokovic, right? Go ahead, Megan.
All of it. Like, don't get me wrong, though. Those surgery naps are fantastic.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. That's probably some of the best sleep you'll ever get in your life. So if you ever have to have surgery, it's a great nap.
But you're not getting that naturally.
No,
right?
You're not. No, he's wasted all of our time, and he continues to waste our time. And, you know, at the end of the day, if we weren't talking about it for our jobs, I wouldn't be giving any attention or breath or oxygen or anything else that's naturally coming out of my body to Novak Djokovic for him to steal and maybe use naturally for himself. Like, why do we continue to waste our time on someone who continues to essentially try to make fun of our intelligence and think that he's smarter than everybody? He's the tennis version of Aaron Rodgers.
and again, other players have pointed this out, is the fact that he's number one in the world. Because if he, like, he's not gonna, as like a Australian, if he had to play in the qualifying tournament to get into the bottom of the bracket, they just been like, just don't come. We don't need you. If he was the number 12 player in the world, don't come. We don't need you. But the fact is, he sells a lot of tickets. Apparently, he has a big fan base in Australia, and so organizers are like, hey, bring it on. Meanwhile, Dave, the best soccer player that Canada has seen, that Canada's produced for a long time, maybe ever, is laid up. Caught COVID, and Alphonso Davies, he caught COVID. Medical testing post-COVID revealed myocarditis. How does this square with the let's just all go out and get Omicron because it's mild and it's just like getting a cold crowd?
I mean, it shows just yet again that we only have the barest perception of what Omicron and frankly COVID as a whole, what the long-term effects are. I mean, it seems to be affecting different people in profoundly different ways. And the blithe approach that the sports world has taken to this over the last several months, after 2020, in many respects, being a model of restraint in the face of COVID and a model of care that they sent out to the world in many respects, given that they were operating on the run. Starting with the NBA, you know, I give the sports world a lot of credit for how they handled a very difficult situation. You have to, I mean, we don't do history, even recent history, very well in this hemisphere. But to even do a compare and contrast, which I'm not seeing a lot of sports writers doing at all, between 2020 and 2022 would be a worthwhile compare and contrast, because 2022 seems to be, who cares? Approach of the sports world, and that who cares approach, let's just keep the trains running on time, let's pack Cowboys Stadium, all that stuff. I mean, this is has to be laid at the feet of not only ownership, but every single stakeholder in the sports world, from ownership, athletes, fans, management, wherever you want to put it. There is a general, the unions, a general consensus that just says we are going to play. And we are going to push forward. And I get it. Believe me, that's not just a sentiment in the sports world. You see it across society of people sick and tired of these restrictions, sick and tired of masks, sick and tired of feeling isolated. And in the sports world, they get a needed escape. I just wonder if we still are allowed to teach history, if we will look back and see just how foolish we were in our desperate need to escape a difficult situation, and how we ended up taking a terrible, historic, once-in-a-century problem and making it that much worse for everybody involved.
Yeah, because every for everything that has changed about what we think about the COVID-19 since it hit the scene and since we've been learning about it, like one constant has been the potential for heart problems on the back end of an infection. And so, and I cannot think of you off the top of my head, I could think of like a laundry list of players from various sports who have lost lives, lost careers to heart problems, because this idea that young people are healthy and they'll bounce back, they're young and they'll fit, they'll bounce back to an extent. But at the same time, if you are in a sport that's as physically demanding as soccer and something is wrong with your heart, you are asking for serious, serious, serious problems. Now, I don't condone, but I understand like the lazy, cheap, selfish mentality that leads people to like view the workers that we once called essential as just disposable. You know, get back in the meat packing plant, stand shoulder to shoulder with people. If you get sick, there's more poor people waiting to take your job. What I want is cheap steak and I want it now. I don't want supply chain disruptions. Like, okay, so that's what you value. Cool. But like these people who play sports, and you want your sports too, you don't want your sports disrupted. But they're subject to the same health problems. And so now you're going to sit here and watch. So you don't value the person that works in the grocery store or the factory or the Amazon fulfillment center. But now here's Alphonso Davies. Do you value him? Go ahead, Dave.
I know we moved past it, but this is one of the enraging things about Djokovic, because tennis has actually done a very admirable job in trying to keep that 2020 feeling going at least a little bit. I mean, something like 98% of the top 100 players in both men's and women's tennis are vaccinated. There's efforts made at social distancing. It's actually a great social distancing sport. And as someone who does, and because I don't want to sound all high and mighty, like someone who values sports as a source of escape, and as someone who loves tennis, people might not know the Australian Open is known as the Happy Slam. That's its slang in the tennis world, because it's the start of the season.
Yes,
people are coming back refreshed. People are ready to start making their mark. You know, Australia for them is like April in baseball.
Okay,
it's the Happy Slam, and this could have been a very particularly happy slam because look who's back, Naomi Osaka. You know, only one of the great players alive, coming back after her much publicized and very public and very brave wrangling with mental illness in the last year. So great to have Osaka back. Rafael Nadal, my goodness, the gallant one, the knight himself, after 7 months away, back in Australia. And this should have been Nadal, 20 majors won. That's tied with the record. Who's he tied with? Novak Djokovic, 20 majors. Slugging it out in Australia. Let's see who makes it. But Novak Djokovic is so self-centered and so selfish. And Aaron Rodgers is the perfect comparison, because this isn't just a case of somebody who says, I don't want to take the vax and it's none of your business why. You know, this is the case of somebody actively trying to manipulate the process because he thinks he's just smarter than everybody else. And because of that, he's taken the Happy Slam and put a nice shadow over the entire thing. So, thanks a lot, Novak Djokovic. And let me tell you this, he's making no friends on the tennis tour right now.
In and out, my favorite part of the week. We got two topics teed up. Actually, and they tie directly just what we just talked about. So we'll start here. ATP and Netflix, the tennis tour and Netflix have announced that they are going to start a documentary series like Drive to Survive for F1, except it's going to be about tennis. PGA Tour is going to have one. Megan McPeak, are you in or out on this Netflix immersive documentary series format coming to even more sports?
I am only in if Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka are included. If they're not in it, I don't want any part of it.
That's a good answer. Probably the best answer. Dave Zirin, you in or out?
I'm in, but only as entertainment, because anytime you have these behind the lines, inside reports, it's much more cinema than it is actuality. It's like watching Die Hard to learn how to be an NYPD officer. I mean, it's an entertaining film, but if you're looking at it as a how-to guide, you're probably doing both yourself and the city of New York a disservice. So I'm so excited to see this, but I also understand that films like this tend to be a step removed from the actual reality, which is often far more boring and difficult than fans actually want to see.
Yes, or and here's the circumstance under which I'm in. Like, if you show me, if you tell me the stories instead of just trying to promote the sport, I'm in. And so, because what we started with, remember Hard Knocks on HBO, right? And they would spend training camp with the team, and you would see everything that happened with the team, and you would see the coaches fighting with the players and the players backbiting each other. You would see all of this stuff, and this was compelling. But each season, it became more and more of a promotional vehicle for the league. So by the time they did Hard Knocks with the Raiders, and the Raiders had Gruden, who we didn't know at the time, but we now know says a lot of racist things. They had Richie Incognito, who we knew even then said a lot of racist things. And we had the famously unreliable Antonio Brown. Like, this is a pretty combustible group of people. And what happened? Everybody's getting along. Oh, nothing to see here. So if there's no conflict in the story, and every week is just everybody's happy, we're all awesome, spend your money when we come to your town, then don't bother. But if we get to see like what actually happens, because they want to do the same thing with track and field. They want a track and field drive to survive. And I can guarantee you, they will screw that one up. I guarantee you, like, every week will be about, didn't Sebastian Coe, the head of World Athletics, wasn't he right making that decision? Yes, he was. Next week, oh, he chopped long jump down to 1 round. Wasn't that great? It was awesome. Next week, and that's all it'll be. So if that's all it's going to be with tennis, save it. What I want to see is some Hard Knock style fighting and backbiting and conflict. That's what I want to see. Topic 2. Dave Zyron, since you're in front of me. Alphonso Davies, just got finished talking about him. I keep seeing, now I don't know how he feels about this nickname, but I keep seeing people calling him Phonzie. Are you in or out on calling Alphonso Davies Phonzie?
I mean, you know, as most people, I hate showing my age, but sometimes you feel ferociously that you have to put your age forward as almost a badge of honor and wear your scars with pride, like you wear your gray hairs with pride because they're earned. And one thing I know in this world is that there's only one Phonzie, and his jacket is in the Smithsonian. And so out of respect for that, you got to find your own nicknames. It's like, I was telling you this, Morgan, it's like, as a New York kid, I'll never forget being outraged that they were calling LaDainian Tomlinson LT.
Yes.
It's like, you got your nickname. I still call the coach of, I still call a certain basketball coach Glenn Rivers. The coach of the 76ers will always be Glenn Rivers to me. I'm like, good call, Glenn, because there is only one Doc. So I'm about personal primacy when it comes to nicknames.
Except you're from New York, so there's 2 Docs.
Oh, yeah. And he was only on my wall when I was growing up. So
for you youngsters, Dr. J played basketball. Dwight Gooden, Dr. K, aka Doc,
bad.
Pitched for the Mets. And if you guys want to see like one pitcher dominate,
there's 3 then, because Doc Halladay.
Yes, here in Toronto, exactly.
Oh my goodness, I'm being hoisted with my own petard. Fine, there are many Docs, but we got to at least in the NBA have one Doc, right?
That is true. Just one per league, right? American League Doc, National League Doc, and NBA Doc. Megan McPeak, are you in or out on calling Alphonso Davies Phonzie?
Listen, if his mama named him Alfonso, I'm gonna call him Alfonso.
That's true, but now people do have nicknames, right? So I'm out on Phonzie only for a few reasons. One being that, like, if you guys, I mean, most of you aren't old enough to remember Happy Days, but like the phrase "jumping the shark," meaning like something has passed its stale date and it's not cool anymore, and it's actually gone from cool to ridiculous. That comes from Happy Days because the character Arthur Fonzarelli, Phonzie, he rode this motorcycle, and there was this one episode where he was going to jump over a shark on his motorcycle, like with a ramp, which was the point where people said, man, Happy Days This series needs to end. So the idea of like naming this guy after something that literally means you've gone from cool to corny, don't put that on this man. And for younger people, no, sorry, because I can't even quote Jay-Z because Jay-Z's old. But that Jay-Z song at the beginning of Reasonable Doubt, and he was talking about how nice his leather was, and he said, my leather, time to separate the butter sauce shit from the leather on the Fonz, because Phonzie wore that cheap leather jacket. So this is what I think of when you call this man Phonzie. And so don't do that to Alphonso Davies. Like, the name itself is cool enough. He doesn't need a nickname, just like the boxer we love, Montana Love. Like, he doesn't need a nickname. That name is perfect.
Not
Alphonso
everyone
Davies
needs nicknames.
No, none. And the only thing that would have been worse than this, because if he was in the the NBA, they would have tried to find some way to put Maple into his nickname because he's from Canada. And that would have been worse. He would have been Maple Phonzie. So I
would
guess,
not have let that happen.
No. Thank you, Maple Megan. But
I would also just point out that there are several MVP candidates in the NBA this year who were not born when Reasonable Doubt dropped.
Well, exactly. So them looking at Jay-Z, that's like me looking at BB King. You know what I mean? My parents would sit me down like, come listen to this album, son. BB King at the Regal Theater in Chicago. This is where we used to hang out and watch shows. Like, this is us looking, this generation of athletes looking at Jay-Z. All right. And so in or out. But again, we are recording on Martin Luther King Day, and this will probably hit the internet a couple days after Martin Luther King Day. But if you've been with this show, then it doesn't matter. We don't stick to a calendar. We don't say we only discuss Black history February 1st to the 28th. Like Glenn Jones, R&B tenor, said, and giving myself to you anytime's the right time. And so y'all get this on Tuesday or Wednesday, but it'll still be relevant. This is part of the problem I find with Martin Luther King Day, is that everybody wants to quote the same quote from Martin Luther King on the holiday and then go back to their life the next day. We'll start with you, Megan McPeak. You have a Martin Luther King quote or content or film that you recommend?
I just wish that people would truly learn about him. And the best way, I think, in my opinion, is to read in full his letter from Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And that way you can actually understand the contextual side of who he was and not just go by these quotes. And I actually saw a friend of mine, Kate Scott, who is the play-by-play voice for the 76ers. She actually had a great tweet this morning, and it said, to those people who are going to quote Martin Luther King today, make sure you keep the same energy the next 364 days. Like, that's perfect, because don't just pick the one day to not be who you really are the rest of the year. Keep the same energy. So if you are not on board with, mm-hmm. Social injustice and making sure everybody has their, rights as humans across the board all year long, don't just be it on January 17th. Like, you can miss me with that. I don't need that energy. We do not need that energy in the world, given everything is going on. So if you can't do it 365, don't do it for one day. But his letter from Birmingham is probably, in my opinion, one of his best pieces of work that you can truly get some insight as to who he was and what he was fighting for. And also his daughter Bernice is a really fantastic Twitter follow, because she is always on a daily basis sharing different stories and insights from her father and their the King Foundation and everything that they're doing surrounding him. And they do it 365 and have not stopped. But Letter from Birmingham is probably one of my most favorite pieces by him.
Perfect. Yeah, and because what we don't want is for people, for Martin Luther King Jr.'s work and legacy to become so sanitized that all people think of when they hear the name Martin Luther King is that it's a holiday Monday in January and it's NBA basketball on during the day. Right? There's a lot more to it than that. Dave Zirin, what do you think our audience needs to remember and take away from Martin Luther King Day?
Well, I would start, if you want something quick and easy, the book The Radical King, which is a book of his speeches that people don't like talking about, where he does speak much more forcefully about the needs for social, racial, and economic injustice, where he speaks about the triplets of evil in terms of materialism, militarism, and inequality. Yep. And this is a powerful king. And the intro to The Radical King is written by Cornel West. It's short, it's sharp, it's brilliant, and it's very open about the changes in King's politics over the course of his life. So I would recommend the intro to The Radical King by Dr. Cornel West.
Perfect. And now, because when I think of Dr. Martin Luther King, here's the thing. His assassination was one of two big events that drove my family here to this country, to Canada. Assassination of Martin Luther King, the election of Richard Nixon, right? And my parents started doing the math and looking into their crystal ball and thinking to themselves, okay, well, what is America going to look like for our kids? Is it going to look more like the place that Dr. King was fighting for, the place that Dr. King wanted to be? One line from Dr. King's final speech: "I want to make America what it ought to be." Is it going to look more like that, or is it going to look more like what we see today, with racist backlash everywhere, from public schools to voting rights to like aggressively gerrymandered voting districts to dilute Black voters' power? And so, you know, my folks weren't willing to take the chance that in a world without Martin Luther King and with Richard Nixon as president, that Martin Luther King's vision of America would still bear fruit. So they followed my grandparents to Toronto, and then a few years later started having kids. But the point is, like, this stuff is like abstract to a lot of people, but it's also personal to a lot of people who are still alive today. So now, the quote we keep seeing from Martin Luther King: "Judge people by the not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." That's from the "I Have a Dream" speech, which again is a quote that is surgically lifted from that speech. Because if you listen to the whole speech, it is not a colorblind speech. Because the other thread that runs through that speech, the point that Martin Luther King keeps hammering home in that speech, is what America owes Black people, right? The idea of the promissory note to the Negro that keeps coming back stamped insufficient funds, right? That America owes Black people for what Black people have contributed in the way Black people have been treated by this country that they helped build. But again, that part of Martin Luther King never makes it to these Twitter, social media quote cards. Go ahead, Dave.
Justin, we know where that, I mean, because we are, you know, ostensibly a sports show, we should point out that if anybody wants to read the entirety of the speech from 1963, they have to go to George Raveling's house.
He has it?
Yeah. Oh, you didn't? That's a great story. George Raveling was a very young man at the March on Washington. Later went on, of course, to coach USC, be an assistant coach for the Olympic teams in the 80s. And they left the speech on the podium when King was done. And Raveling looked around and picked it up, because otherwise it would have gone to the garbage. And he has held that speech ever since.
Good for him. Amazing.
Nice
Thank
job.
you.
George Raveling. Of all people.
Amazing.
Like, what, did Henry Bibby not grab the speech?
was Bill Russell there that day?
Yes, he was.
You would think with his long arms. Yeah, long arms, fast reflexes. I thought he would have got it. And the other, and just the other speech I would recommend you guys listen to if you have 45 minutes is and you have, because it might not be a snow day by the time you listen, but you know what I mean. Listen to the mountaintop speech, April 3rd, 1968, the last speech he ever gave. Again, if you're looking for this colorblind, docile Martin Luther King, he is not there. He never existed, right? This is a Martin Luther King talking about Black people en masse boycotting corporations that won't hire Black people, right? This is a Martin Luther King, again, not talking about making America not great again, but what it ought to be, making America what it says it is. And for him, you can't do that without talking about race, right? And this colorblind, toothless Martin Luther King that people keep wanting you to think existed never existed. So if you're going to listen to two Martin Luther King speeches, listen to the I Have a Dream speech. Everyone quotes those words and content of my character, but doesn't listen to the whole speech, because that is not a colorblind speech, and neither is the mountaintop speech. And so you think, if you ask yourself, like, what would Martin Luther King be doing today? Like, what did Martin Luther King die doing? What was he doing when he died, Dave? Where was he? What was he doing?
He was doing the Poor People's Campaign.
What was he doing in Memphis? Who was he supporting?
The sanitation workers strike.
Thank you. A strike.
With the slogan, I am a man.
Thank you.
And so he was fighting for economic justice to his last day, which is why the Washington Teachers Union was supposed to have a big rally today in Washington, D.C., and it was knocked down by people who said it wouldn't be appropriate.
This is my point, Dave.
Yeah.
So when people want to talk about like what Martin Luther King would be doing today, he would not be like fighting for Apple and Amazon's right to squeeze more money from consumers. He would not be fighting against raising the minimum wage. He would not be fighting to force people back to work during a pandemic to risk their lives for the economy. So listen to the mountaintop speech. Think about that, and think about like how everything Martin Luther King is talking about back then relates to exactly what we're going through right now. Go ahead, Dave. Just
that the book Going Down Jericho Road by Michael K. Honey, which is about the Memphis sanitation strike and why King felt so compelled to be there, is probably one of my favorite books, history or otherwise. Going Down Jericho Road by Michael Honey. So brilliant.
Perfect. Let's leave it there because I'm worked up. I'm worked up. I need to go decompress. But on the real, guys, listen to the whole I Have a Dream speech. Listen to the whole mountaintop speech and think to yourselves about like what Martin Luther King, who would he be advocating for today? Same people he advocated for back then, the vulnerable, right? And the people who deserved empowerment. So think about that. All right. So this has been another week of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I don't do this by myself. I have the best panel in the business. Dave Zirin, the people are going to miss you between now and next week. Tell them where to find you.
At Edge of Sports on Twitter. Hit me up. You got any questions? If you want a good book recommendation, I love talking books. If you have any recommendations for me, hit me up. So, because that's what we do.
Okay, perfect. Megan McPeak, the people are going to get to miss you between now and next week. Tell them where they can find you.
As always, on the Twitterverse, at Megan McPeak, spelled with an H, because it is the right way to do it.
All right. And I am Morgan Campbell at Morgan P. Campbell on Twitter, on Instagram. I don't have Facebook. I don't have TikTok. I don't have Triller. But you can find me on Facebook and Instagram doing what I do. If you're new here, or if you're a veteran here, make sure you hit the subscribe button to CBC Sports, hit the like button, leave a comment, talk to us on social media. Using the Bring It In hashtag, send us your in or out idea suggestions. Why is it so important that they do all these things, Megan? Who got to eat?
Aside from myself, the algorithm.
Exactly. The algorithm. The algorithm eats, we all eat. So there we go. So listen, it's been fun and informative. We went overtime again, as usual. That's even with cutting out the segment about boxing self-sabotage, but we'll get back to that soon enough. So for Megan, for Dave, this is Morgan Campbell. This has been another week of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell, and we will see you guys next week.